Welcome to our sound for video session for February 24th is today. and we're doing a little bit of a follow up from last week where we talked about microphone placement. And we had some really good questions that last time. Let me just check and see if we had any no new questions posted for this week, but there's still plenty to cover. So why don't we go ahead and dive in on that? Last week we had some really great questions, and one of the things that people asked or some of the questions that people asked were interesting things like how to, what microphones do I use? Well, the biggest factor in getting great audio is, of course, as for those of you that have been in the course, you already know this, but just to reiterate, is getting that microphone up nice and close to the talent. And that's generally going to be the case for a boom microphone. Let me talk about some other things too, though. Um, Shotgun microphones that sit on top of the camera are tricky. They are a necessary I view them as a necessary evil, and depending on the situation, and what I mean by that is that there are certain situations where if you are running and gunning, you're a one-man or one-woman show, you're not gonna have the opportunity to boom a mic out over the talent necessarily, and in some cases, using the shotgun microphone on top of the camera is okay. I get the example I cite is um, for when my daughter is going to perform at the school, she's in the band and she performs at school. The shotgun microphone on top of the camera, if I'm at a reasonable distance, is probably going to be just fine for those kind of situations. But if you are trying to capture dialogue, leaving the microphone right on top of the camera is almost never going to result in the best possible sound. So you definitely want to boom the mic when you can. However, again, moderation. There are circumstances that make things difficult, and I think there are some circumstances where it's okay to leave the mic on top of the camera, but again, not ideal, especially if you're doing interviews or talking head. And their main reasons, two main reasons. Number one, as we discussed, when you get farther away from the microphone, you don't pick up as much of the bass, first of all, so it sounds a lot thinner. You pick up a lot more ambiance, so that's one thing. But the other thing that most people don't think of is that when you have the microphone sitting on top of the camera, the mic is pointing straight out right along the lens axis of the camera. And what that means in practical terms is even if you get up close to the talent, you're also going to pick up any ambient noise behind them. So typically, when you're booming a microphone, you are booming it in, say the person's head is right here, you're booming the mic down like this. So the pickup is is coming this way and it's going toward the floor. And so you're attenuating all of the stuff that's sitting behind the actor or the talent or the actress. And that is what gets you the most isolated, kind of dry. Um, you'll still pick up some ambiance, but not nearly as much as if it's sitting on top of the camera. So that's something to consider as well. If you're still struggling, you're getting too much ambient noise, you're not getting what seems to you like a very clean dialogue track, then that's definitely one thing you should consider. That's one of the huge downsides I think that people don't consider of putting a microphone on top of the camera. So, doesn't matter how awesome that microphone is, it doesn't matter how much you spent on that microphone, with one exception that I can think of. But even then, it's still not perfect. There's no magic. You can't defy the laws of physics generally. And if you don't have the microphone up close and you don't have it, again, if this is the talent's head, I want to boom the microphone down at an angle like this so that I'm picking up the talent and I'm only picking up what may be coming off of the floor behind them. So that's the cleanest way to do it. Now, some other considerations. One of the questions that was asked last week was a very good one, and that is if I'm doing a wide shot, don't really want to use a lavalier because lavaliers, I will put a lavalier on the talent for safety, but I don't really want to rely on that microphone. If I don't have to, I'd still like to boom it. What are the options, or what are the other options, creative options that you can use to get decent audio when you're shooting a wide shot? Well, we talked about a few things. Obviously, you can use a lavalier. That's an obvious one. You can plant a mic. We didn't talk a whole lot about that, but planting mics can be a very, very effective technique. And what planting a mic means is you hide it in the scene. So it's actually in the scene, but the viewers aren't necessarily going to notice it. So you have the opportunity to get it up nice and close to the talent, but the audience can't see it. And that can be a very effective technique as well. It's used plenty in different styles of productions, narratives, whatever it may be. So that's another option to consider. One that we didn't consider, and that was brought to my attention by our friend Scott Vanderbilt, was that hey, you can also boom the mic in the frame. You can have the actual boom mic, whether that be a shotgun or a cardioid of some sort, in the frame. But then after you're done shooting that frame, you take the microphones, the boom out, and you do another shot, what you'll call it your plate, and you'll actually use that to composite the microphone out. Now, that only works in certain circumstances. It works easiest if the talent's not moving, if the frame doesn't change, the camera's not moving. So again, most interviews and talking heads, this will apply to where you could actually potentially use this. And if you wanted to see all of the details, we just uploaded that video to YouTube just last night. So definitely go check out the channel, my YouTube channel, if you're interested in seeing how that technique is done. And I can show you here in just a few minutes, really quickly, what that technique looks like as well. So that is actually a potentially really useful technique. It's a little, it's compositing, so there's always going to be some risk that it's not going to turn out perfectly, and your production may or may not have time for it. But it doesn't take a lot of time, to be honest. It does. It's not that difficult in post production. It's not that difficult during production. So, for example, if you shoot a 30-second clip, you could probably get away with 5 seconds of plate shot. So, what that means is, so you have the talent go ahead and talk with the boom mic in the frame. You take the mic out, keep the talent there. Don't change any of the lighting. Don't change anything else, and then shoot another 5 to 10 seconds, and then you can use that plate, that 5 to 10-second video, to composite in the background or even the foreground that doesn't have the microphone in it. And again, pretty effective way to do a wide shot if you need to do that. So those are some things to consider. Let's go ahead and take a look at that right now. Let me pull up Premiere here. And as it turns out, I have this sequence already here. Let me share my screen so you can see all this. Let's share the entire screen. Okay. Premiere. There we are. Okay, I'm going to create a new sequence, and what I'm going to do is get my footage here. Okay, so let me just show you what I'm talking about here. So here is my shot where I actually doing my talking. Here's my talking head. You can see the mic, of course, is boomed within the frame. So we have all that in there. So we're going to drop that into a sequence here. Okay, there's our clip. There it is. Very good. There's a there's a precious look on my face, look kind of bored or something. But then I also shot this this plate. This is what this looks like. So same thing. I had moved the microphone out of the frame, and we have that. Let me actually show you something else too. I alluded to in the video. You got to be careful about shooting the frame or the plate without the talent in the shot. And here's why. If you look carefully at the backdrop here, look at the lighting on the backdrop between the original and the plate. Notice down here, especially like underneath this, there's some bounce board here. Watch down here. Lighting actually changed some. And so that's not going to composite very well. So what I would recommend is that when you do the production piece of it, after you shoot your piece, keep the talent in the frame, in their spot or on their mark, and shoot it with them still in the frame. Because what was happening in this plate was this key light was actually bleeding over into this backdrop a little bit and changing the light on the backdrop. So that would be very tough to composite. But if you keep the talent there, it keeps the light that's falling onto the backdrop consistent. That's if you're lighting it. Even if you're not lighting it, it could change. So best to keep it there if you can, to keep the talent there if you can. So that's, let's go ahead and grab this plate here. Just got that. Let me just see what we have here. We'll open this up. Oh, whoops. Okay, one thing I need to do here is first this clip, I brought in way too much of it. So let's just shrink this down. This is really the only piece we need. It's just like anyone else, I needed a bunch of takes to get it just right. And then for this piece, that should do it for us, hopefully. Okay. All right. So now, there we go. So again, what I've done here, here's the original take with the talking head. Okay. And then here is the plate. Again, where I'm in there, no microphone. Okay, so here's what I'll do to in Premiere Pro at least. And if you have questions on other editing apps, we can show you how to do this in Final Cut Pro as well. Older versions, again, as I said, if you've already seen the video, I apologize. There's a little bit of repetition here. But in older versions of Premiere, it's slightly different, but not by much. So what we want to do is we want to select the plate clip down here in our sequence and then come up to the effect controls. And we're going to go into this opacity effect here. And what we can do here is we can grab this free drop Bezier. So what this does is it allows us to draw um, a mask, in essence, around the person. So what we want to do is we want to keep this part of the plate. This is the part without the microphone. So we want to keep that. But what we want is the original clip of me. So the way I'll do that is I just need to draw a mat around me. The Bezier tool is nice because you can essentially draw a pretty tight thing around your talent, and then we can just say, okay, this is the part I want to keep. That's what I'm outlining here. So that's cool. Let's just scrub through this and make sure that when I'm moving my hands and everything, that I'm not cutting my hands off by actually, oops, so you can see there, I extended out of the frame. It turns out that I don't need that part. So what I can do, let me just zoom in a bit there. Truth is, I only need to about here. Okay, so that's going to do for us there. So now I can scrub through and we're good. Okay, but here is the problem, and I described this in the other video too here. Look at the lighting is different on the plate, and that's going to make things a little bit more complicated. Not impossible. There are still some things we can do, but here's where I made a mistake, and this is why I'm giving you kind of very specific instructions in terms of how to do the plate shoot. You want to shoot the plate right after you're done shooting the talking head, and you don't want the talent to move because that way you'll get the same, you won't run into this issue here where I have suddenly a much darker plate. What happened here is I'd actually turned all the lights off, went back to my computer, downloaded all the footage, and realized, oh shoot, I actually need to stay in my mark when I shoot the plate. So I came back out and shot the plate, but I didn't let my lights entirely warm up, and therefore they weren't as bright. So avoid making that mistake. But what we can do is we can come up to the effects here, and we have lots. Let's just do a search for brightness. And here's a brightness and contrast effect that'll do for us. We'll just drop that on the plate. And then what I can do is take that brightness and crank it up until it matches. Let me pull this out a little bit. We'll get that back to fit so we can see it well. We'll go ahead and pull the brightness up on the plate until it matches better. Now you see, I won't be able to get it perfect because as soon as I pull it up so that it blends perfectly up here, then it's off a little bit down here. So I'm gonna need to pull back on that brightness a little bit. Let's see. Probably somewhere in there is about the closest I'm gonna get. You can still definitely see it. I don't know if you can see it on the webcast here, but I can definitely see it here. Takes a little bit of an eye to see it, but then what I can do is I can feather the mask that we drew here. So I can make this not such a hard line, and then it will blend a lot better. So if I pull up that mask, if I go really crazy, you can start to see the microphone again. But if I just pull it out, then it kind of blends it pretty nicely. It's still there a tiny bit, but there's an example of how you can do that. So now there's an example of how you do it. So we've essentially just composited out that microphone. And that's another technique that you can do. So we covered that in more detail in the video. So if you want to go check that out, that's over on my YouTube channel. So I hope that is helpful for you. So that's another option to consider. I wanted to talk a little bit more about lavalier microphones as well. A lot of people have expressed frustration trying to hide lavaliers under clothing. And indeed, that is a hard thing to do, to do well at least. And the reason for that is that when you hide, when you just stick a lavalier microphone underneath someone's shirt or even between the button placket, underneath the buttonholes, but before the back of the shirt. Um, when the talent moves, you're going to pick up some clothing noise. Often, what will happen is the clothing will rub along the capsule of the microphone, and then the microphone will pick that up, and that'll register in the recording. Not ideal, and it makes a racket, and it doesn't sound good. And that's one of the big reasons why I don't like to rely on lavalier microphones as the only option during a shoot. But there are some things you can do. And in fact, let me just grab something here. I have a few things in my lavalier kit here. Just kind of store them in this box here that I can quickly take with me. One thing to consider is moleskin. This can be pretty handy for you. The thing with moleskin, and this is actually here in the US, it's marketed under, or it's sold under Dr. Scholl's, and it's made for blisters on your feet. But what it is, let me see if I can get that so you can see it pretty well. It's sort of a felt type of fabric. It's very soft, and it has an adhesive on the back. You can kind of cut out the size piece that you need. And this can be really useful. So once you get the lavalier, for example, mounted underneath a button placket of your talent, you can put a piece of this opposite the lavalier microphone, and that will help to reduce some of that clothing noise. So moleskin is something to consider if you do need to hide it down here, again, on someone. To be honest, there are some issues with mounting lavalier microphones I've found over time on someone's chest. It's not the best place to locate a microphone in terms of the overall sound that it will pick up. It's actually better if you can place it off to the side a little bit, because then it gets it out of this sound shadow underneath their chin. This actually creates a little bit of a sound shadow. So what that actually typically means, especially on men, when you put the lavalier microphone down here kind of in the center of their chest, what will often happen is that you'll pick up lots of chest resonance. So you get a little bit, or a fair bit more bass. And then it also at the same time can be in the chin sound shadow. And so it won't pick up as much of the high frequency. So you get a kind of a bias sound. If that's a sound you want, then that's great. You're all set if you want that really sort of boomy chest resonancy sound. If you move it up to the throat, then it's going to sound a little throaty. So off to the side, if you do have to, if you're going to place it down here, somewhere in this area where it might be more on a lapel, maybe a better place in terms of the overall sound quality that you pick up. So that's something to consider. My actual favorite, and I've been experimenting with this a lot more lately, is actually ideally, if it's okay to show it in the frame, the most ideal place for a lavalier or a small microphone is right here on the cheek in terms of the best overall pickup. So that's something to consider. A lot of exercise videos, a lot of live performers will wear those nowadays. And that's an option. I don't know if, it depends on your production, whether you can do that or not, and whether or not hiding the microphone is necessary. Second choice, in far as I'm concerned, is hidden in the hair, just at the hairline on the forehead. And that actually also has a very good, very balanced sort of sound to it. But it's a lot more work, and it's a lot more difficult, and it doesn't work with all talent. If someone's bald, not going to work. If someone has not a lot of hair, may not work as well, or if it doesn't have a lot of body to it. That's something to consider as well. But that can be a good sound, and I think actually one of the better sounds. And they do it a lot in theater. That's often where the lavalier microphones are hidden in theater productions, and I like it for film and video as well. Again, it takes more time to get it set up. Usually, you need a hair and makeup person, or you need to really know what you're doing. And we'll show, I'm actually getting ready to shoot a tutorial video on that that'll go up into the course in the next couple of weeks here. My wife has graciously agreed to be the the guinea pig, if you will, and we'll love her up hiding the lavalier microphone in her hair. So that, again, like I said, is probably one of the better sounds you can get from a lavalier. The advantages of that method is that you don't get clothing noise, typically. People's hair don't generally move enough to create a lot of noise interference from that, so that's good as well. When they turn their head, the microphone turns with them, so they don't go in and out in terms of pickup. So that's good as well. But again, the downsides, if someone's bald, not really even an option unless they're wearing a hat. And it takes some time. It takes a little bit more time to get things set up, and actually a fair bit more time to get things set up. So those are some downsides to that method as well. But if I do have to use a lav mic, that's one of my preferences. I'd rather do that. Now, there are some creative things you can do as well, obviously, with lavalier microphones. If someone's wearing a hat, underneath the rim of the hat can be a good place to put the microphone as well. So that's something to consider. What else? I think sometimes under the collar can be okay, although I don't typically like the sound of that very much. But if you got to move quickly and you're finding that the chest is not going to work very well, that's another option. This has the advantage of not picking up as much clothing noise if you actually hide the lavalier microphone under the collar, if they're wearing a collared shirt. But again, you do get a little bit more of a throaty sound to it, so it's not my favorite choice. But again, in terms of that, actually, while we're on the topic, I've probably talked about these before, but this is some tape. This is actually sold as toupee or wig tape. It's two-sided tape, and that can be really, really helpful for mounting lavalier microphones. What's nice about it, too, is that you can attach this to people's skin, and it tends not to irritate their skin because it's actually tape made for attaching to skin. So that's worth looking at. Again, that's I've got a link to that. I can add a link to this down below this video as well, but that can be pretty handy as well. Another thing that I have talked about before, but not in a great amount of detail, Rycote made a product called undercovers. I think I talked about this in one of my blog posts a while back, but the way this works is it essentially has a felt part. Just pull one out here. Okay, on the first there's an adhesive. This is a two-sided adhesive thing. So you would attach this to somebody's, garment out in this area here. Again, off to the side is best. And then you attach, once you've attached that to their clothing, you pull this little cover off, and then you adhere the lavalier microphone to this. And then on top of that, you place this little piece of felt that also comes with the kit. Something like that. And that's called an undercover. You can hide it underneath someone's clothing, and that reduces the clothing noise. Especially, I noticed if they're not waving their arms underneath their clothing, somewhere off to the side on their chest over here is actually a pretty good spot. Even if people move their hands a little bit, if they're that kind of talker, it doesn't tend to pick up a whole lot of noise. So that's definitely something to consider. Again, Rycote undercovers. There's that. Okay. Oh, wow. Time is flying. When we do the piece where we talk about hiding the lavalier microphone in hair, tension clips are actually surprisingly good for hiding lavalier microphones in hair. And that sounds crazy. We'll actually chop this up, and actually we can use something smaller and a little bit more gentle, something called French wire. And I didn't know what this is or was until my wife told me about it. And French wire might work. We're going to experiment with a little bit. But French wire is actually often used in jewelry making. Let's see if you can see that. But it's a much lower tension type of coiled wire, and smaller, and it's probably easier to hide in someone's hair. So we're going to experiment with that. And then what you do essentially is, I'm not going to go into it too much here, but you comb a part. It would actually be on the part of their head, ideally where they don't have a part already. You part the hair there. You bring the lavalier microphone up, and you put the head close to the hairline where it can still be hidden by hair once you move the hair back. And what you do is you pull up a small lock of hair on one side of the cable, and then a small lock of hair on the other side of the cable, and then you use that little tension spring to attach those two pieces of hair to hold the cable in place. And then you do maybe 2 or 3 of those around the back of their head, and then tape the cable on the back of their neck, and that should hold it in place in most cases. And of course, you put the hair back over the microphone area, and then it's hidden. So that's the general idea, but we'll actually show you in more detail how to do that in a future episode. So those are some thoughts on lavalier microphones. I've had a lot of questions about, hey, I can't seem to get a good recording with a lavalier microphone when it's hidden underneath the clothes. So those are some thoughts. Again, it's always risky. There's no 100% sure way, as far as I'm aware yet, to get a perfectly clean recording with a lavalier that's hidden like that. But I'm learning still, and hopefully find a something that's close to a perfect way to do that. So hope that was helpful there. All right, we did have one question, and this is moving away from the topic. So we're pretty much gonna say for now we're good with microphone placement. Let me just talk for a minute about headphones. We're just going to sort of introduce the topic here. Obviously, we need to go into a lot more detail in a future episode. But one of the questions that came up was, hey, tell me a little bit more about headphones and what kind of headphones can be used for production audio and also for post-production, because I think they're actually 2 separate things. So there are a lot of different microphones that people use for production. Sony makes a good number of them. There are lots of others. I can't name all the brands right now, but what I use is this is a Bear Dynamic DT770 Pro. This is a closed back microphone. The reason I like these is that they're very comfortable. They sound good. They're not perfect, but they sound good. And I think, again, the biggest thing is that they're incredibly comfortable. I can wear these for hours and still be pretty comfortable. And that's going to be important in production audio. So the reason you have closed back for production is that you don't want the sound bleeding out and getting picked up by the microphone. So you need to be able to hear what you're doing, but you don't want it to be bleeding out. And that's why for production, almost always you're going to be using closed back headphones. So that's the one thing to keep in mind when you're looking at headphones for, recording, shooting, and things of that nature. Now, one other thing to keep in mind is when you're looking at headphones, depending on what gear you're using, you can see here that this actually says 80 ohm. That is the impedance rating of the headphones. And generally, I will say this, consumer devices, if you plug that into a consumer device, 80 ohm is going to be just fine. Most consumer devices can drive decent volumes and decent quality to an 80 ohm set of headphones. If you get something more in the 600 ohm category, consumer devices are going to have a hard time getting a good strong signal to that. They're just not made for that. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're looking at headphones for recording audio, is look at the ohm rating. Now, I don't understand all of the deal with impedance and what it does in terms of sound quality and things of that nature, but a lot of times the higher end headphones will have higher ohm ratings, and they typically require more capable headphone amplifiers. So if you are going to get, I think they also make actually this set I'm wearing here, that's the Bear Dynamic DT880 Pro. These are actually open back. These are for post-production, but these have a 250 ohm rating. What I do notice is that when I'm working with these, I have to turn the volume up more. Now, I have a capable headphone amp in my audio interface, so it sounds just fine, and I'm able to get plenty of volume out of them. But I do have to turn them up higher. I have to turn up the volume higher for these with a higher ohm rating than I do for these which are, again, 80 ohm. So I'm not here to suggest that lower ohm rated headphones are better. They're not necessarily better. There's so many things that go into the headphone design. But again, if you're using a consumer grade recorder or a camera, you're probably not going to want to show up with a 600 or even higher ohm rated set of headphones because you're not going to be able to hear anything. So, and that is essentially mixing consumer grade recording equipment with professional grade headphones. So just some general guidelines and just to get the conversation started as far as headphones are concerned. We'll come back to this topic. This is a huge topic that I don't know a ton about. I know enough to kind of survive, but we'll cover that in a little bit more detail here in future episodes. All right, let's check in and see if we had any audience questions before we sign off here for today. I don't see any listed right now. So I wanted to thank everyone who has watched the episode live here, and for those that contributed ahead of time with questions and such. Thanks, everybody. We will go ahead and pick this up next week. If you are a member of the course, I'll go ahead and send an email out. Actually, to anyone, I'll send an email out. If you're signed up on my learnlightandsound.com, school.learnlightandsound.com. If you go to the website there, you don't have to spend any money. If you just sign up there, I will notify you every Sunday of the upcoming episode for the week. For those in the class, right before the episode starts, I'll also follow up with another email so you can join live and ask questions live if you want to do that. And otherwise, we will talk to you guys all again next week. Take care.